When you think of Sonic the Hedgehog, your mind probably races to blistering speed, colorful 2D landscapes, and those unforgettable Green Hill Zone loops. But in 1996, Sega threw fans a curveball with Sonic 3D Blast, an isometric adventure that traded traditional side-scrolling for a fresh perspective. Released on both the Sega Genesis and Sega Saturn, this title marked a transitional period for Sonic as Sega grappled with evolving gaming trends and the looming dominance of 3D gaming. Developed by Traveler's Tales, the game was Sega's answer to the rising expectations of 3D platforming, a landscape being reshaped by Nintendo's Super Mario 64 and Sony's Crash Bandicoot. Sonic's first big step into pseudo-3D was ambitious, but not without controversy. Sonic 3D Blast takes a straightforward approach to storytelling, keeping things simple but tying it neatly to the series' established lore. The game's plot kicks off when Dr. Robotnik sets his sights on a new scheme involving the mysterious Flickies, small bird-like creatures that inhabit Sonic's world. In a nefarious twist, Robotnik discovers that Flickies possess the unique ability to travel through large rings to reach other dimensions. Sensing an opportunity to fuel his mechanical army, the Doctor traps the Flickies inside his deadly Badnik robots. Enter Sonic, who stumbles upon Robotnik's plan during one of his high-speed adventures. As always, it's up to the Blue Blur to save the day. The goal is simple: free the Flickies, collect them, and guide them to safety through warp rings to thwart Robotnik's evil designs. The story isn't revolutionary, but it's serviceable, providing just enough of a narrative to justify Sonic's globetrotting antics. What sets Sonic 3D Blast apart is how the Flickies themselves become a core part of both the story and gameplay. By rescuing the birds and using them to progress, the game adds a layer of urgency to Sonic's quest. Interestingly, Sonic 3D Blast hints at a larger world outside the immediate conflict. Flickies were first introduced in Sega's 1984 arcade game Flicky, and their inclusion here is a clever nod to Sega's history. While this backstory isn't explored in great depth within the game itself, it's a fun Easter egg for longtime Sega fans. Sonic 3D Blast's story isn't about reinventing the wheel, it's about setting the stage for a colorful, action-packed adventure. Whether you're chasing down Flickies or smashing Robotnik's latest creation, the game's narrative stays true to the Sonic formula. Fast-paced, high stakes, and just a little bit quirky. Sonic 3D Blast's gameplay stands as both its boldest experiment and its most divisive feature. Departing from the side-scrolling roots that define the series, the game adopts an isometric perspective, which attempts to simulate a 3D environment while still operating on a 2D plane. This decision gave Sonic 3D Blast its unique identity, but it also introduced challenges that left fans divided. At its core, the gameplay revolves around rescuing Flickies. Each level tasks Sonic with smashing Badniks, freeing the captive Flickies inside, and guiding the birds to warp rings to progress. Collecting all the Flickies in a stage is mandatory to unlock the next area, a departure from the straightforward goal of reaching the end of a stage in earlier Sonic games. This mechanic adds an exploratory element, encouraging players to fully explore each zone. However, it can also feel repetitive, especially in later levels where stages become more sprawling and enemies harder to locate. The Flickies themselves introduce an extra layer of challenge. Once freed, the birds follow Sonic, but they're highly vulnerable. A single enemy hit will scatter the Flickies, forcing players to backtrack and gather them again, a process that can become tedious, especially in areas filled with hazards or enemies placed just out of sight. While the mechanic adds tension, it sometimes feels like it conflicts with Sonic's signature speed-focused gameplay. Control is another point of contention. Sonic's trademark momentum can feel clunky on angular platforms. Jumping onto enemies or navigating narrow paths often requires more precision than the controls comfortably allow, leading to frustrating moments. On the Genesis, the lack of an analog stick further exacerbates the issue, making diagonal movement awkward. The Sega Saturn version, with its improved frame rate and smoother animation, fares slightly better in this regard but doesn't completely resolve the control quirks. While the gameplay tries to blend Sonic's speed with exploration and collection mechanics, it doesn't always strike the right balance. Players looking for a traditional Sonic experience may find the slower pace and isometric controls jarring, while those open to experimentation might appreciate the game's attempts to innovate. It's an ambitious mix of ideas, but like a spin dash gone slightly off course, the execution doesn't always stick the landing. If there's one area where Sonic 3D Blast truly shines, it's in its graphics and sound design. Both the Sega Genesis and Sega Saturn versions push their respective hardware to its limits, delivering visuals and audio that stand out, though not without a few caveats. On the Sega Genesis, these visuals are nothing short of impressive. The console's aging hardware was pushed to its limits to produce sharp, vibrant environments. The Sega Saturn version ups the ante with smoother animations, better lighting effects, and enhanced textures. The hardware's extra muscle is especially evident in the game's FMV cutscenes, which were a big deal at the time. The isometric perspective comes with drawbacks. The fixed camera angle can make it hard to judge distances or land precise jumps, and some of the environmental details, while gorgeous, can obscure enemies or hazards. These issues are exacerbated in later levels, where cluttered layouts and muted colors occasionally hinder visibility. The soundtrack of Sonic 3D Blast is an undeniable highlight. Composed by Richard Jacques for the Saturn version and Jun Senoue for the Genesis, the music perfectly captures Sonic's energetic and adventurous spirit. Each zone is accompanied by a unique track that complements its aesthetic. The Sega Saturn's version benefits from CD quality audio, which allows for richer instrumentation and more layered compositions. The Genesis soundtrack leans into the console's signature funky bass lines and twinkling synth melodies, providing a distinctly retro flavor. While Sonic 3D Blast's graphics and sound were groundbreaking for their time, they aren't without flaws. The isometric visuals, while stunning, can make gameplay frustrating, and the soundtrack, though memorable, sometimes feels like it's doing more heavy lifting than it should to maintain player engagement. Still, both the Genesis and Saturn versions deserve credit for their technical achievements, offering some of the most visually and sonically impressive moments on their respective platforms. Sonic 3D Blast holds a unique and polarizing place in Sonic the Hedgehog's legacy. Released during a transitional period for gaming and for Sega, it was both a bold experiment and a reflection of the challenges Sonic faced as the industry shifted toward 3D gaming. However, the gameplay garnered a more mixed response. While some appreciated the isometric perspective and focus on exploration, others felt that the slower pace and awkward controls clashed with Sonic's identity as a fast-paced platformer. The flicky collection mechanic in particular was a point of contention, with some players finding it tedious and repetitive. While Sonic 3D Blast isn't considered a top-tier entry in the Sonic series, it remains an important chapter in the Blue Blur's history. It symbolizes Sega's willingness to take risks, even if the results weren't perfect. For some, it's a nostalgic gem that stands as a testament to the creativity of the 16-bit and early 32-bit eras. For others, it's a reminder of the growing pains Sonic endured as he attempted to transition into the world of 3D. Whether you view Sonic 3D Blast as a bold experiment, a flawed gem, or a misstep, there's no denying its place as a fascinating piece of Sonic history.